I posted on here before, as many of you know. Before high school, actually, when I was a younger kid, I happened to be much more adventurous than the sullen teenager that I grew into. I'd explore the woods near my house as I lived in the country and had the ability to run amok. My mother was in med school at the time, so I was generally unsupervised. I did a lot of exploring. I had the forest mapped out in my head, a set of journals that I scribbled in almost religiously. These journals came with me when we moved from home to home, despite my mother protesting that they were trash. No matter what, I kept those journals. However, when I left for college, I left them behind, resigning them to my mother's care. She kept them, actually. I guess they reminded her of me. She never read them. Neither have I since wrote in them. Probably just childish fantasies, and I'm a law student now. I don't have time for that. So I've never really read the journals. It was until one showed up at my door. I still remember getting back from class and seeing a small composition notebook on the mat. You see, a pal of mine and me rented an apartment for school. Let us afford rent and help each other with food and such. So I picked it up, I stepped inside, instantly walking to the TV stand and grabbing my gun from where it was stashed. It was a Matabella auto revolver, chambered in a .44 Magnum, one I'm immensely proud of. I called my roommate's name, looking around the room. Chris! Nothing unusual was there in sight, so I walked in the kitchen. Nothing like the living room. I swept the rest of the house until all left was his bedroom. Called his name again. Chris, I swear to all that you hold dear, you better not be ignoring me. With that, I rested a hand on the knob, and I shoved the door open. The walls in that place had to be thicker than we thought, and he was sitting at his computer desk, buck naked, watching something and toying with his lower half. I instantly looked away, lowered my gun reluctantly, and had the urge to retch. Instead, I pulled out my phone and texted him, "Turn around, jack off." He felt the buzz of his phone in his pants that was around his ankles and grabbed at it, struggling to get it out, and read the text. His ears turned bright red, and he whipped around, pulling the nearest thing up to cover his crotch. What the f— He noticed my gun. What's up? His demeanor changed in a split second as he saw the gun in my hand and the notebook in the other. Now, this wasn't every day for us, so he knew that something had to be off. I waved the book. Found this in front of the door. Thought maybe someone was here. I looked down the hall. Please pull your pants up. Fine, you ruined the mood anyway, he said. Ew, now I feel obliged to shoot you. I joked, walking down to the living room again. I first rooted around the kitchen for my blacklight, then shut out the living room lights and shined it on the couch. I was lucky that time. No dubious fluids on the furniture. We sat together on the couch once he was dressed. He switched the console on and was playing something dumb, I'm sure. I didn't know what it was as I read the journal. And it seemed to be a pretty normal one, honestly. Things about cool sticks I found, birds I saw, dumb stuff like that. There's even a surprisingly well-drawn map in crayon, which detailed the forests around my house. It was pretty cool. Over the soundtrack of the game and the cartoonish-sounding gunfire emanating from the TV, I said to Chris, "Hey dude, this is weird." So, it looks like my mom sent me one of my old journals. He grunted in response. I kept looking over the map, and something didn't feel right as I stared at it. The center was my old childhood home, the driveway, etc., but as I looked around the map, I noticed something. In a spot on the map, there was a cross drawn in a heavy hand, using not a crayon but a dark red ink. This wasn't ink from a ballpoint pen, no, it looked like it was drawn with a calligraphy pen. What is this? I muttered to myself, staring at it. It was situated what would probably be about a 20-minute walk from the house with stubby childhood legs, with my longer adult legs probably 5 or 6. I got up and decided to call my mom. I walked out the back door and looked out into the slowly darkening horizon. The sun would be setting soon. Picking up my phone, I made the call. It rang once, twice, 3 times, 4. On the 5th, she picked up. Aaron, is that you? Her voice was curious and hinted at hopefulness. Of course, Mom. I smiled through the phone. She could probably hear it in my voice. Despite her being busy throughout my childhood, she was my mom. I loved her. Oh, how's school, honey? Her voice perked up as she gushed about work for a minute or two. She worked at a children's hospital and often had cute stories to tell me about the patients' interactions with service animals and such. I listened, occasionally inserting a yeah or a Eventually I broke in. Hey, Mom, look, I was thinking about coming down for a visit. I haven't seen you in a while. I finished, trailing off. I had to pull the phone away from my ear. She started talking so loud. Of course, when? She practically shouted into the phone. Break starts next week, so then probably. I started to gather the courage to tell her about my journal, but I changed my mind mid-thought. Hey, Mom. Remember when I was a kid, right? All those journals I kept about the forest? Yeah, of course, honey. I still have them, she said, chuckling over the phone. Okay, I said, looking around me. It was getting dark. Hey, Ma, I'm gonna go to bed. Let's talk about this later, okay? I'll be there next week. Okay, bye, honey. Sweet dreams. I hung up the phone, shutting and locking the door behind me. Shut up, Chris. I didn't say anything, he said, smirking. I just love how you are with your mom. Shut it. I went to bed, gun under my pillow. The week dragged on by leaving me to read the journals more. It wasn't very interesting, I must admit it. It mainly contained ramblings about the cool sticks I found or something. There are a few pages that did freak me out a little, though. They were about some sleeping man. Someone I guess I found in the forest. By the way, it was weird. Eventually, break started and I was on my way to see my mom. I drove up there in my beat-up old Ford Taurus. Yeah, I know. I can afford the fancy gun, but I can't fix up my car. Laugh it up. She was waiting in the driveway for me. Woods around us, the house sitting behind her. I climbed out of the car, feeling the cold of the winter bite me despite my coat. Hey, Mom, I said, flashing the left side of my coat open to show her my holster before we met and hugged. I wanted her to know I was wearing it after all. Oh, honey, I missed you so much. She was smiling. I could feel the warmth of it, even over my shoulder. She was a tallish, thin woman, much like me, except, well, at least I had a bit more muscle than her. I missed you too. We broke apart, then walked towards the house. So how's school? How's Chris? She was excited to hear about my life, as usual. It's fine. He's a little rat, as usual. I chuckled, opening the door for her. We stepped inside and talked for a while until she got a call. Sorry, I have to take this. It's work, she said, walking out of her office. Feel free to look around. Naturally, I did so. I walked to my old room, looked at the base of the door. Slip of paper. Still there, surprisingly. I hadn't lived here for a year or two, so by all rights it should have fallen or something from Mom coming in or out, but apparently she really hadn't come in. Weird. I opened the door, letting the paper drop from the door, and walked in. The exact same as it had been when I left. Bed made, bookshelf next to the door, boxes of miscellaneous stuff stacked in the closet. I reached into my inner coat pocket past my gun and drew out the journal. Red composition notebook. I looked around for the box where I had the others, struggling to remember where it was. It had been so long since I had ever dug it out, so I understandably had forgotten where the box was. I found it under my old bed. 6 now, composition notebooks filled a small box, all different colors. Blue, purple, yellow, green, white, pink, and finally, red. Quite the rainbow. I lifted the box up to be placed on the bed, staring at the notebooks within. Suddenly a thought came to me. Sleeping man. I had read about it in the red one, as he mentioned in the others. So, being the inquisitive bastard I am, I decided to look. And yes, he was. I looked through the rest of the journals and they all mentioned some sort of sleeping man. Oddly enough, I couldn't find the name in any of them other than that, but I did find another map in the red notebook. And I decided to follow it. I found a piece of paper and scribbled a note to my mom saying that I was going on a walk. Then, taking the red notebook, a lighter, smoked a little in my college days before this stuff all happened, and my gun, I went walking to find the sleeping man. I walked through the woods for what must have been an hour, following this crayon map through my childhood haunts. and as I was bound to, I got lost. I passed the same clearing, what must have been 6 times, and when I reached it again, I sat down in the center. I pulled my phone out as if to call my mom, but then stopped. Over in one part of the clearing, I could see a small point of rock sticking out of the ground. I walked over to it, then examined it. Brushing away leaves, I found a tiny cross. Small, but perfectly formed, carved into the rock, and I looked closer, and the rock had a line of stone connected to it. I followed it, brushing leaves away as I looked, and ended up in the center of the clearing. I walked back to the tiny spire. Odd. It looked bigger. I walked the clearing, checking if there was more rocks. I found 6 more, all arranged into a 7-pointed star, each with a tiny, perfectly formed cross in the rock. Suddenly, a crack sounded behind me in the center of the clearing, and I snapped my gun out, whirling around and dropping to a knee. There was a man lying in the center of the star, white and of average height. He had a slight bit of facial hair from what I could see, and he seemed to be asleep. 2 questions raced through my head. Where the hell did he come from? And was this the sleeping man? I kept my gun in hand. I stood and I stepped closer. He stayed still, and I walked all the way over to him and examined his face. His eyes were shut. He looked oddly familiar. I tapped him with my free hand, then knelt. He wasn't breathing. And I then did something I'm going to regret for the rest of my life. I opened his eyes. Electric blue eyes looked back at me, staring me down, and a hand flew up and he grabbed my wrist. Electric blue arcs of light exploding from my palms, a soldier falling to his knees, my sword slitting his throat, blood splattering my brow. I recoiled from the touch of the man, and then he sat up on his own. I looked around, the spires huge now, all of them having grown to the size of a tree. He stood shaking his head. He strode over to me and he grabbed the front of my jacket, lifting me up and pressing a finger to my forehead. The armies opposite me quiver in fear, their scent one of fright and timidity as I step forward. Blood drips from my hand. I struggled out of his grip, crawling away and standing about 3 yards away from him, gun raised and pointed at his head. "Who are you?" I was shaking visibly, barely able to keep my pistol pointed at him. "I," he stated, "am Michael." Then he waved his hand. My gun was in his hand. "You have a weapon. Use it." And he stepped forward again, and he grabbed me by the wrist, looking me in the eye. The woman in her dwelling cowered, my sword hanging loosely from my hand, dripping blood and bits of fire as I cut down the man, shearing through his neck like it's dead wood. "Sleep," he said. Then it went dark. I awoke in a hospital bed. Police had filled the room, and when I sat up, there were several guns pointed at me. A doctor walked into the room and yelled at them, ushering most of them out, and then a newspaper was in my lap. The words hazy in my vision. I had to be on something. Morphine, maybe. It's not that I couldn't read, just that I couldn't find the energy. The doctor put a hand on my shoulder and started talking. "They really don't like you, buddy. Personally, I would have let you die, but that would have broken my oath." "What?" I looked at her, my movement slow. She responded by reading the newspaper out loud. "Slasher kills 7 in casino. More suspected." On June 6th, a man entered Harrah's Casino in New Orleans, Louisiana. The man drew a pistol and shot 6 guests, then beat 1 more to death. Police apprehended the shooter in the establishment and believe that he is linked to several murders around the southern United States. More information was not provided by the police, and when the leading detective on the case were questioned, they provided no comment. The behavioral analysis continued on page A7. That answer your questions, killer? She looked at me and walked out, letting the cops back in. I was hauled out of my bed in handcuffs. I was being taken to some holding cell, I guess. It was hazy. I couldn't remember all of it, but on the way to the place, it started to rain and the car I was in crashed. I wasn't chained down. I crawled out of the window, and I've been running ever since. I'm not sure who will find this. My name is Aaron Woodridge. I'm an ex-law student on the run from the law, and I don't want to hurt anyone. Michael does. And I'm not Michael. No matter what. I'm not Michael. Hey there kids, it's me, MrCreepyPasta, and I wanted to tell you all thank you so much for listening to tonight's story, or watching tonight's story if you're on YouTube. If you're not on YouTube, that means you're probably on the podcast that's available on iTunes, on the Google Play Store, and is now actually available on Spotify, and doesn't use as much data. So, hey, that's a thing. If you guys aren't listening on YouTube or Spotify, then I have no idea how else you could have found me. Unless you found one of those books on Amazon. You know, the CreepyPasta Collection, Volume 1, Volume 2. Those are things too. Oh well, I don't know how you would have heard me there, seeing as this was recorded like 2 years after those came out. Well, anyway. Thanks for listening, folks. And sweet dreams.